There is a reason this message found you today, not by accident, not by coincidence. Somewhere inside you, something has already begun to change. Maybe you still think about them. Maybe a part of you still waits for the moment they finally understand your value, but another part of you, quieter and deeper, is becoming tired of carrying a love that has never truly carried you back. Carl Jung believed that the people who enter our lives are rarely random. They arrive like mirrors, reflecting hidden parts of our psyche back to us. And sometimes the most painful relationships are the ones that reveal the truths we have spent years avoiding. The truth that we have abandoned ourselves while trying to be chosen by someone else. The truth that we confused longing with love. The truth that a wounded heart will often stay attached to what hurts it because pain feels more familiar than emptiness. You may have told yourself that if you were more patient, more understanding, more loving, things would finally change. But the deeper question is this: why did you believe you had to earn what should have been freely given? Why did your soul continue knocking on a door that rarely opened for you with warmth? Before we go further, you need to hear something clearly. The pain you feel is real. You were not imagining the distance. You were not being too sensitive. You noticed every delayed reply, every moment they pulled away after getting close, every conversation that left you feeling emotionally hungry instead of emotionally safe. A part of you kept hoping that eventually they would become the version of themselves you saw in your imagination. But hope can become dangerous when it keeps us tied to what repeatedly diminishes us. Many people remain trapped in relationships like this because the unconscious mind fears loss more than suffering. Jung taught that the psyche seeks familiarity, even when familiarity is painful. Staying attached to someone who does not value you can feel safer than facing the unknown space that appears after letting go. And so the cycle repeats itself. You wait, you explain, you forgive. You lower your standards little by little until you no longer recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. But here is the paradox. The moment you begin reclaiming yourself is often the moment the illusion starts to break. The moment you stop chasing, something changes inside your energy. Not because you suddenly stop caring, but because your soul becomes exhausted from betraying itself. There is a hidden psychological pattern beneath these relationships that Jung would describe through the concept of the shadow. The shadow is the unseen part of us carrying old wounds, fears, insecurities, and unmet emotional needs. Often when someone does not value us, the pain touches something much older than the relationship itself. It awakens the child within us who once felt ignored, unseen, or emotionally abandoned. This is why letting go feels so difficult. You're not only grieving a person, you're grieving the fantasy that this person would finally heal a wound you have carried for years. Think about how many times you accepted less than you deserved because you feared losing them completely. How many times did you silence your own needs to avoid conflict? How many times did you convince yourself that breadcrumbs were enough because at least they were something? Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Many people believe they simply have bad luck in love, but often they are unconsciously repeating emotional patterns learned long ago. Patterns that taught them love must be earned through sacrifice, patience, or emotional self-erasure. And this is why letting go becomes more than a relationship decision. It becomes a psychological awakening. The human mind creates attachments not only to people, but to identities. Perhaps for a long time your identity revolved around waiting to be chosen, around proving your worth, around hoping your love would eventually transform another person. But eventually, reality begins whispering something impossible to ignore. Love cannot grow where respect does not exist. Jung spoke about the tension between persona and shadow. Persona is the social mask we wear to survive in the world, the version of ourselves we believe others will accept. But beneath that mask lives the shadow, carrying every emotion we hide from ourselves. In relationships where we are undervalued, the shadow often becomes louder. Jealousy, fear, desperation, anxiety, emotional dependency. Not because we are weak, but because the relationship activates unresolved wounds hidden beneath the surface. The tragedy is that many people become ashamed of these reactions instead of understanding them. They say, "Why am I acting this way?" without realizing their psyche is desperately trying to reveal something important. Sometimes your suffering is not punishment. It is information. It is showing you where you abandoned your own dignity in exchange for temporary emotional comfort. And yet, even now, part of you may still hope they change. That one day they suddenly wake up and realize your worth. But Jung reminds us that transformation cannot be forced. People only change when they are willing to confront themselves honestly. You cannot heal someone by sacrificing your own peace. One of the most painful truths in life is realizing that love alone is not enough to sustain a relationship. You can deeply love someone and still recognize they are incapable of giving you the emotional safety you deserve. That realization changes everything, because once you truly see reality, you can no longer return to the illusion without feeling the cost of it. There is a moment that quietly arrives during the process of letting go, a moment when exhaustion becomes greater than attachment. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop analyzing every message for hidden meaning. You stop trying to decode silence, and slowly, without even noticing at first, your energy begins returning to you. This is the beginning of self-love. Not the superficial version people speak about online, not ego, not pretending you no longer care. Real self-love is much quieter. It is the decision to stop abandoning yourself for someone who repeatedly abandons you emotionally. When you finally stop chasing validation from someone who cannot provide it consistently, something unexpected happens. You begin hearing your own inner voice again. And that voice asked difficult questions. Why was I willing to tolerate emotional confusion for so long? Why did I believe inconsistency was romantic? Why did I fight so hard for someone who rarely fought for me? These questions matter because healing begins with awareness. Jung believed that individuation, the journey toward becoming your authentic self, requires confronting the unconscious patterns shaping your life. Letting go of someone who does not value you is often part of that journey, because every unhealthy attachment forces you to choose between remaining psychologically asleep or becoming conscious. Consciousness is painful at first. It requires seeing the relationship clearly instead of through fantasy. It requires admitting that the version of them you loved most may have existed more in your imagination than in reality. But awareness also creates freedom. The moment you stop idealizing someone, you begin seeing yourself more clearly too. Many people fear loneliness so deeply that they remain in emotionally starving relationships simply to avoid being alone with themselves. But Jung saw solitude differently. He believed solitude could become a sacred space where the soul reorganizes itself, a place where the noise of external validation finally quiets enough for inner truth to emerge. Do not fear the silence that comes after letting go. Inside that silence, your identity begins rebuilding itself. At first, it feels empty. Your routines change. Your mind still reaches for them out of habit. You may replay memories repeatedly, remembering the good moments while forgetting the emotional instability surrounding them. This is normal. The psyche often romanticizes what is familiar, but eventually, something shifts. You begin noticing how much energy you once spent trying to maintain a connection that constantly left you uncertain. You realize how often you walked on emotional eggshells. You realize that peace feels unfamiliar because chaos had become your definition of love. And slowly, your nervous system begins understanding that love should not feel like survival. Jung believed that what irritates us, obsesses us, or wounds us deeply often points toward unresolved material within ourselves. When someone does not value you, the experience can become a mirror. Not because you deserve mistreatment, but because the relationship reveals the places where your own boundaries, self-worth, and emotional awareness still need strengthening. This does not mean blaming yourself for how others treated you. It means reclaiming responsibility for what you choose to tolerate moving forward. There is power in that distinction. Victimhood keeps you emotionally tied to the past. Awareness returns your power because once you recognize the pattern, you no longer need to repeat it. Many people imagine letting go as a dramatic moment, but often it happens quietly. One ordinary morning, you wake up and realize you no longer want to beg for consistency. One night, you realize you're tired of interpreting mixed signals like sacred messages. One day you notice your heart beginning to crave peace more than emotional intensity. That is growth, not becoming cold, not becoming distant, becoming emotionally honest. The truth is, when someone truly values you, you do not constantly question where you stand in their life. Genuine care creates clarity. Emotional confusion is often the nervous system recognizing inconsistency while the mind keeps trying to rationalize it. And yet, people stay because hope is seductive. Hope whispers that maybe tomorrow will finally become different, but years can disappear inside that kind of waiting. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the danger of unconscious living. If you never examine your emotional patterns, you continue recreating the same experiences with different faces, different names, different stories, but the same psychological wound beneath all of them. This is why letting go is not just about ending a relationship. It is about interrupting an unconscious cycle. Perhaps for the first time in your life, you begin choosing yourself instead of emotional survival. And this choice changes your entire energy. Not in a mystical way, in a psychological way. When you stop desperately seeking validation, your behavior changes naturally. You become calmer, more grounded, less reactive. Your emotional center slowly returns to you instead of existing entirely inside another person's approval. Ironically, this is often when people who undervalued you begin noticing your absence more intensely. Not because manipulation works, but because your energy is no longer available in the same way. They feel the difference between being loved unconditionally and no longer having automatic access to that love. Still, this does not mean your healing should revolve around whether they return. That would only recreate the same dependency in a different form. The deeper lesson is about you, about becoming someone who no longer needs to shrink themselves to receive affection. Jung believed the soul seeks wholeness above comfort. Sometimes relationships collapse because they can no longer support the version of yourself trying to emerge. And perhaps this relationship entered your life not to complete you, but to awaken you, to force you into confronting the painful places where you forgot your own worth. Every emotionally painful experience contains the possibility of transformation. The question is whether we resist the lesson or allow it to change us. Many people resist because transformation feels like death to the old identity. The old identity knew how to chase, overthink, wait, and emotionally overgive. But healing asks something entirely different of you. It asks you to remain connected to yourself even when another person pulls away. That is difficult, especially if your nervous system learned long ago that love must be earned through emotional labor. But eventually, you understand something life-changing. You cannot convince someone to value you by sacrificing yourself harder. You cannot heal abandonment wounds by staying where you feel emotionally abandoned. You cannot build self-worth through relationships that continuously diminish it. And so the process begins. Not instantly, not perfectly, but honestly. You begin setting boundaries. You stop over-explaining your emotions to people committed to misunderstanding them. You stop accepting inconsistency disguised as complexity. You stop romanticizing emotional unavailability, and with every small decision, your inner world changes. Jung often spoke about integration. Healing does not mean becoming perfect. It means becoming whole. It means accepting the parts of yourself you once rejected: your anger, your grief, your loneliness, your unmet needs, your fear of abandonment. When these emotions remain unconscious, they control your behavior from beneath the surface. But once you acknowledge them honestly, they begin losing their power over you. This is why self-awareness is so important. You cannot heal what you refuse to face, and perhaps one of the greatest acts of maturity is admitting that part of your attachment was never truly about the other person alone. It was also about the emotional meaning you assigned to them. They became symbolic, a symbol of being chosen, a symbol of worth, a symbol of finally receiving the love you always longed for. But no human being can sustainably carry that responsibility for another person. Eventually, the fantasy collapses, and beneath it, your real self waits patiently to be rediscovered. This rediscovery changes your entire relationship with love. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop mistaking inconsistency for mystery. You stop believing suffering proves emotional depth. Instead, you begin valuing peace, reciprocity, emotional safety, mutual effort, presence. You realize healthy love does not require constant emotional decoding. It does not leave you starving for reassurance while surviving on occasional moments of affection. Healthy love allows your nervous system to relax, and perhaps for the first time, you understand that being alone is far less painful than continuously betraying yourself for temporary closeness. That realization is freedom. Carl Jung believed that becoming conscious often feels uncomfortable because awareness dissolves illusions the ego desperately wants to keep alive. But illusions eventually become prisons, and maybe your soul has finally become tired of living inside one. The moment you let go of someone who does not value you, you begin reclaiming enormous psychological energy. Energy, once trapped in anxiety, waiting, obsessing, hoping, overthinking, and emotional self-negotiation suddenly becomes available again. At first, you may not know what to do with it, but slowly, life begins returning. You reconnect with forgotten parts of yourself, your creativity, your ambitions, your inner peace, your sense of identity outside the relationship. You begin remembering who you were before emotional confusion became your daily environment. And this is why letting go is not failure. It is rebirth, not because the pain disappears immediately, but because your soul finally stops moving against itself. There will still be difficult nights. Memories may return unexpectedly. Songs, places, certain times of day may awaken old emotions. Healing is not linear. Jung understood that the psyche moves in cycles, not straight lines. But each time you choose yourself, instead of returning to what repeatedly wounded you, your inner foundation grows stronger. And eventually, something beautiful happens. You stop needing closure from the person who hurt you because clarity has already arrived within yourself. You no longer need them to validate your pain for it to be real. You no longer need them to choose you for your worth to exist. You no longer need them to return for your life to move forward. That is emotional liberation. And once you experience it, you understand why self-love is not selfish. It is survival. It is psychological alignment. It is the refusal to continue abandoning your own soul for temporary emotional access to another person. Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. Perhaps this painful relationship was part of that journey, not the destination, the initiation, the experience that forced you inward, the mirror that exposed old wounds, the heartbreak that awakened your consciousness. And maybe one day you will look back and realize the greatest loss was never losing them. The greatest loss would have been losing yourself while trying to keep them. So if your heart is struggling to let go right now, breathe. You're not weak for grieving, you're human. But do not confuse grief with destiny. Some people enter your life to teach you what love is not. Some relationships collapse so your identity can rebuild itself on healthier ground. And some endings are actually invitations into a more authentic version of yourself. The person you are becoming no longer needs to beg for clarity, no longer mistakes emotional inconsistency for passion, no longer abandons themselves to avoid abandonment from others. That version of you is stronger, calmer, more conscious, and far more aligned with real love. Because real love does not require you to disappear inside it. Real love allows you to remain fully yourself. So let this be the moment you stop measuring your worth through someone else's inability to recognize it. Let this be the moment you stop romanticizing emotional pain as proof of connection. Let this be the moment you finally understand that your value existed long before this relationship and will continue long after it. You're not losing yourself anymore. You are returning to yourself. And perhaps that is the most important transformation of all.